I grew up in a part of the mountains where sound carried in strange ways. Long, thin, wandering paths of echo that could take a voice and stretch it farther than it ought to go. The old folks used to say the hollers had memories of their own, that sometimes they whispered back to you if you walked alone at the wrong hour. I'd always chalked it up to superstition, the kind of talk people used to keep kids from sneaking around after dark. But the night I heard my name spoken on the ridge, all those warnings came crawling back into my mind like roots breaking through old wood. My uncle had asked me to check his trapline before the weather rolled in, and I'd agreed mostly to prove I wasn't afraid of the mountain the way others were. The sun had dipped behind the far ridge quicker than I expected, leaving the sky a washed-out gray. Fog had already begun sliding down between the pines, gathering along the low places like it had weight. I knew every part of that ridge, the old oak stump where Grandpa once left corn for deer, the broken fence where a black bear had climbed through, and nothing about it had ever scared me. But walking alone that evening, the stillness felt different. Too complete. Not a breeze, not a bird call, not a chirp of an insect. Just the crunch of my boots on the leaf-packed ground. I was halfway down the slope, following the narrow trail that cut between two boulders, when I heard it. My name. Not shouted or spoken clearly. Just breathed out, like someone close behind me had whispered it through cupped hands. It wasn't threatening, not at first. It sounded calm, almost gentle. The way someone might talk to a friend they didn't want to startle. I stopped quick and turned around, expecting to see one of the Harmon boys from down the road, or maybe old Mrs. Kelver's grandson playing a trick. But the ridge was empty. The trees were too still, standing like tall silhouettes in the fog. I waited for a moment, trying to hear footsteps, but the woods stayed quiet. Unnaturally quiet. I told myself it had been some odd echo from the valley, or maybe my tired brain misheard a gust of wind. I kept walking, my boots hitting the ground faster now, and I forced my eyes straight ahead. I didn't want to look back again. Didn't want to acknowledge the uneasy weight settling in my chest. Then it whispered again. This time it wasn't behind me. It was closer. So close I felt the brush of warmth on the back of my neck. I froze in place, breath trapped in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone walk up. I hadn't heard anything at all. I didn't dare turn around. I just stood there listening, waiting for another sound. But the woods were silent again. I swallowed hard and forced myself forward. My steps felt uneven, like I was trying not to break into a run even though every instinct in my body begged me to. By the time I reached the old service road, the fog had thickened enough that I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. The moment my boots hit gravel, I broke into a full sprint, not stopping until the glow of my porch light cut through the haze like a lifeline. Inside the house, I locked the door and shut every window, telling myself it was just nerves and silence playing tricks on me. I'd had a long day. Maybe exhaustion had worn my mind thin enough to hear things that weren't real. I repeated that to myself as I washed up, ate a cold supper, and got ready for bed. But even lying under the covers, my body still felt coiled tight, like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. I left the window cracked open because the room felt too stuffy otherwise. The woods outside were quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. More like everything out there was holding its breath with me. I closed my eyes, tried to focus on my breathing, tried to steady myself. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I could feel sleep pulling at me, slow and heavy. Then I heard it. My name again. Whispered from the open window beside my bed. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The voice had been soft like before, but this time it wasn't gentle. It carried something else in it. Something fragile and searching, like whoever said it didn't know whether they wanted me to answer or not. I turned my head slowly toward the window. The fog outside was pressed right against the screen, thick enough to hide anything beyond the porch rail. I whispered, "Who's there?" Even though I already knew no one would answer. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, just barely, the fog shifted. Not like wind or natural drift, but like someone standing just out of sight had leaned closer. I shut the window fast and locked it. For the rest of the night, I lay awake listening to the faintest sounds, the settling of wood, a creak somewhere in the hallway, a soft thump on the porch that I prayed was a raccoon. Morning came slow, but it came, and when the first light broke through the blinds, the tightness in my chest finally eased. I should have left it alone. Should have chalked it up to exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But something about that whisper didn't let go of me. It felt too real. Too intentional. The next afternoon, I went back up the ridge. I told myself I wanted to prove there was nothing up there, nothing strange at all. But deep down, I think I wanted to understand why the voice had sounded familiar. That was the part that kept gnawing at me. It hadn't been a stranger's voice. It had sounded like mine, or at least close to it. The ridge felt different in daylight. Less threatening, but not welcoming. The air had a stillness to it that made my skin prickle. I walked the trail slowly, listening for anything out of place. When I reached the spot between the two boulders, I stopped. The air felt colder there. Heavier. I stood perfectly still, waiting for a whisper, a shift, any sign that something had been real the night before. But the woods stayed silent. I checked around the trees, searched for footprints, broken branches, anything. I found nothing. Not even deer tracks. The whole area felt untouched, like the world had scrubbed it clean overnight. I told myself that had to be enough. Had to be proof that I'd imagined it. It was almost enough, until I started walking down the slope again and heard leaves crunch behind me. Not loud. Just one step. One deliberate step. I didn't turn around this time. I just kept walking, each step faster than the last until I reached the service road again. That night, I locked every window and door, drew the curtains tight, and sat awake long past midnight. The whisper didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next. But the feeling stayed, like something out there knew my name now, and was waiting for the right time to say it again. Days turned into weeks, and the mountain settled back into its usual rhythm. Folks talked about hunting season, about weather patterns, about normal things. But every time I walked near the ridge, every time fog slid low between the pines, I felt it, that quiet, watchful presence in the woods. And some nights, when I'm lying awake long after the house has gone still, I swear I hear the faintest breath outside my window, just barely brushing the edge of my name. Waiting. I've lived my whole life tucked into a pocket of the Appalachian Mountains where winter settles in early and holds tight long after spring should have arrived. Folks around here treat strange lights on the ridges the same way they treat sudden weather changes, with a quiet shrug and a cautious glance. Most of the time, it's hunters heading home late or a lost tourist waving around a flashlight they don't know how to use. But the night I saw that lantern drifting beyond the timberline, I knew before I even stood up from my porch that it wasn't anyone from town. It was too steady, too still. A warm, soft glow moving slowly across the upper ridge, like someone carrying a lantern with a careful hand. There was no flicker of wind, no bob of footsteps. It just glided at a height where no one should have been walking in winter, especially not in snow that deep. I watched it for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe more, until the cold worked its way into my bones and curiosity worked its way into everything else. Against every bit of good judgment I had, I grabbed my coat, keys, and a half-used flashlight and got in my truck. The old mining road hadn't been maintained in years. It twisted up the mountain in narrow, icy swerves that could slide a person into a ravine with one wrong turn. Snow crunched under the tires in a way that told me no one else had driven up recently. The air pouring in through the cracked window was sharp enough to sting. Every breath made my chest feel tighter, like the mountain didn't want me there. When the trees finally opened into the clearing, I cut the engine and stepped out. The world fell silent. Snow muffled everything except the faint crack of ice forming on the branches. I could see the lantern again. Farther into the woods now, drifting just past the tree line like someone waiting for me to follow. I almost called out, but something about that stillness stopped me. It wasn't the fearful kind of stillness. It was expectant. I left the truck running. Maybe I already knew I'd need the warmth. Maybe I knew I wouldn't want to fumble with the keys when the time came to get out of there. I followed the lantern's glow into the trees, stepping through untouched snow that came nearly to my knees. My breath hung thick in the air. Every few steps, I checked behind me out of habit, making sure I wasn't being followed. But the strange thing was that my own footprints weren't there. The snow behind me was smooth, perfect, unbroken. I tested it once, lifting my foot and putting it back down. It sank in normally. But when I stepped forward again and looked back, the impression had been wiped clean like the snow was repairing itself. I told myself I was seeing things wrong. That maybe the falling flakes were filling in the gaps faster than I expected. But it wasn't snowing. The sky above the branches was clear. The lantern stopped moving then. It hovered between two tall spruces, glowing low and warm, and I realized what bothered me most. There was no hand holding it. No silhouette. Just the light, suspended in the air like someone had hung it on a hook made of nothing. The closer I got, the more wrong the air felt. Like I'd stepped into a pocket of cold that didn't belong to the rest of the woods. My breath came out too slow, the way it does when fear makes your lungs forget how to work. I told myself to turn back, that I'd gone far enough. And that's when the lantern dimmed, just a fraction, like it was breathing with me. I turned around. This time I didn't hide it. I walked fast, nearly stumbling as I tried to retrace steps that didn't exist. Every few yards, I looked back even though I told myself not to. The lantern stayed between the trees, unmoving, but its glow pulsed softly, like a heartbeat in the wrong place. When the clearing finally came back into view, I felt a relief so sharp it almost hurt. My truck headlights cut through the darkness like salvation. I climbed in and slammed the door shut, keeping my eyes on the windshield while my hands shook on the steering wheel. I forced myself to breathe. I forced myself to think. Then, stupidly, I forced myself to look toward the tree line. The lantern was there. Far closer than it had been, sitting right at the edge of the clearing. Too close. Like whoever carried it had followed me the entire way without making a sound, without sinking into the snow, without leaving anything behind. The light flickered once. Then again. Then it started to move toward the truck. I threw the truck into reverse so fast the tires screamed. Snow kicked up around me as I backed onto the road, the lantern's glow creeping toward the front bumper like it was floating down the slope. I didn't look directly at it, just caught glimpses in the corner of my vision, enough to know it was keeping pace with me. When the road dipped, the light disappeared behind a stand of trees. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the engine. I kept checking the mirrors all the way home. Every porch light I passed felt like a warning rather than comfort. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I expected the light to come back, but because I couldn't stop replaying the moment I realized my footprints had vanished. That part still sits with me, heavier than the rest. Snow doesn't work like that. Mountains don't work like that. For the next few days, I didn't tell anyone. Not my uncle, not the neighbors, not the store clerk who kept asking if I'd been out late because I looked tired. I didn't want anyone thinking I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. But the lantern didn't leave me alone. 3 nights after it happened, I saw the glow again. Lower on the ridge this time, nearer the creek that runs behind my house. It didn't move. Didn't drift. It just sat there between the trees, faint as a candle burning at the end of a long hallway. I watched it from my kitchen window for nearly half an hour, waiting for it to vanish. But it didn't. It stayed there steadily until dawn, then faded with the sun as if the night itself had been holding it in place. Most folks would say to call the sheriff or go investigate with friends. But around here, we know better than to chase something that wants to be followed. And I understood finally that whatever held that lantern wasn't looking to hurt me. At least not in the usual ways. It wanted me to return. Some nights I hear the faint crunch of snow, even when there's no snow left on the ground. Some nights I see a soft flicker through the trees when the power goes out, like a reminder that winter hasn't forgotten me. And every time I step outside with the cold biting at my skin, I swear I feel the same pocket of air I felt up on the ridge. Cold, expectant, and far too still. Like something is waiting for me to come back to where I stopped leaving footprints. I've walked these mountains since I was old enough to follow my father into the timber. I know the ridges, the hollows, the game trails that twist through the underbrush like veins. I know which cabins belong to which families, which have been abandoned for decades, and which ones you're supposed to stay away from. Out here, a cabin isn't just a structure. It's a piece of someone's history. And cabins don't just appear where they didn't exist before. But that winter morning, when the fog hadn't yet burned off and the frost still clung to the ferns, I found a cabin sitting in a hollow I'd hiked more times than I could count. A hollow that had always been empty. The cabin looked old, but not ruined. Its roof sagged slightly, and the boards were weather-worn, but the door hung straight and strong. The windows weren't broken or clouded with dust. No footprints led to it. No path. No tire tracks. Just this quiet little place that should have been impossible. I stood there for a long while, trying to piece together how something that size could have been built without someone hearing it. The closest road was miles away, and even then it was barely more than a gravel mess. Nobody had hauled lumber up here. Still, I felt pulled toward it, like something in the air around the hollow was nudging me forward. The silence was thick, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. When I stepped onto the porch, I braced myself for the groan of old boards, the shift of nails under weight, but the wood stayed silent. Perfectly still. Too still. Like it wasn't wood at all. I pushed the door open gently. It didn't resist. Inside, the air smelled wrong, like cold stone and wet earth after a cave-in. The temperature dropped enough to sting my eyes. I called out a simple hello, just to break the tension. But the sound didn't echo. It didn't bounce off the walls. It just stopped, as if the room swallowed it whole. There was almost nothing inside. No stove, no bedding, no shelves, no tools. Just one wooden chair sitting 5 feet from the doorway, perfectly centered like someone had taken their time placing it. A thick, dark blanket lay draped across the backrest. It looked handmade, the kind of pattern older folks around here used to weave in the winter. I reached out and touched it. It was warm. Not body temperature warm. Fresh warm. Like someone had been sitting there only moments before I arrived. A shiver moved through me in a way cold alone couldn't explain. I turned, scanning the corners of the cabin again, searching for any sign of where the person went. There were no footprints on the dusty floorboards. No mud, no scuff marks, no trace of anyone walking in or out. But someone had been there. And they had slipped away silently, without disturbing anything. Without touching the door. Without leaving a single piece of themselves behind, except the warmth of that blanket. Suddenly I felt exposed, like standing in the middle of that room made me visible to someone I couldn't see. I backed toward the door, careful not to take my eyes off the chair. I didn't know why, but looking away felt wrong, dangerous, almost. A pressure built in my chest, that same instinct that warns you when a storm is about to break overhead. The kind of warning that comes from someplace deeper than reason. Outside, the air felt different, clearer, as if I'd stepped out from underwater. I took a few steps back and looked at the cabin again. It sat there harmlessly, quiet and small, the way any forgotten homestead would. But something inside me knew better. This place hadn't been forgotten. It had been hidden. I didn't run. Running in these mountains only gets you hurt. But I walked fast. Every few paces, I checked behind me to see if the cabin was still there. It was. Until suddenly it wasn't. At the crest of the ridge, I turned one last time. The hollow lay open and still, but the cabin was gone. Not collapsed. Not obscured. Gone. As if it had never existed at all. The frost-covered ground was unbroken except for my own footprints. The tree line was the same as it had always been. I stood there until the cold bit through my coat. Then I made my way home, telling myself I just misremembered the hollow, that maybe I'd wandered off trail. But I knew better. The mountain doesn't play tricks like that. At least, not without reason. Later that night, I pulled out my old topographical maps, the ones my father marked up years before he passed. I traced my route twice over. I knew that hollow. I'd hunted it with him, camped near it, hiked it a dozen times on my own. There was no cabin drawn on any version of the map. Not in the old hand-drawn ones. Not in the newer ones issued by the forestry office. Not anywhere. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw that chair facing the doorway, waiting for someone to return. I kept thinking about the warmth of the blanket, the perfect silence inside the walls. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied, just not by someone who used doors. In the following weeks, I hiked that trail half a dozen more times. Not because I wanted to find the cabin again, because I was afraid I would. Every time I stepped into the hollow, it was empty. Just winter bare trees, a thin sheet of frost, the same quiet I'd always known. Nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I went there at the wrong moment, or maybe the right one, I'd see that cabin sitting there again exactly as before. Door shut, windows intact, chair waiting. And I still wonder, if I went inside again, would the blanket be warm? Or would someone still be sitting there? I'd made that late-night run between Ridgefield and Porter's Gap more times than I could count, enough that the curves felt like muscle memory. Most nights were quiet, just the hum of the engine and the winding black ribbon of the switchback road threading its way up the mountainside. But from the moment I left Ridgefield that night, something in the air felt wrong. Heavy, like the mountain was holding its breath. I kept telling myself I was just tired. I'd been up since before dawn loading freight, and the cold had settled deep into the valley that evening, the kind that crawls under your coat no matter how tight you pull it around you. But within minutes of starting the climb, I felt the kind of unease that makes you sit up straighter without knowing why. Fog had started to spill over the treetops like slow-moving smoke, and my headlights only managed to cut a narrow cone through it. The rest was swallowed in darkness. The road curled up the mountain in tight coils, edges dropping straight off into black nothingness. I'd always hated that part. The guardrails were old, bent in places from accidents that happened long before my time. Halfway up, the overlook came into view, a small clearing carved into the mountainside where hikers sometimes parked in the summer. It was empty at night always, which was why my foot nearly slammed the brake pedal through the floor when my headlights swept across someone standing at the far edge. The figure didn't move, not even a little, just stood facing the valley, tall and still, like they were carved from the dark. For a second I thought maybe I was seeing things, that the fog was twisting shapes out of the trees. But the closer I got, the clearer it became that this wasn't a tree. I slowed the truck to a crawl. If someone's car had broken down, they could be freezing out there. But something in my gut tightened the closer my lights cut across them. I should have been able to see details, clothes, a face, anything. But it was like the light slid off them. No features. No color. Just a solid shape, darker than the night behind it. I rolled the window down an inch. "Hey!" I called out, but the wind swallowed the word the second it left my mouth. No reaction. Not a turn of the head, not a twitch. Nothing. I pulled past the overlook, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. Maybe it was some hiker who'd wandered off and was half frozen, or someone high out of their mind. Maybe the fog was messing with my eyes. I kept giving myself rational explanations, but they felt thin, like wet paper. When I hit the next curve, instinct made me check my rearview mirror. The figure was gone, but something was moving across the road, slowly, deliberately, like a shadow detaching itself from the trees. My mirror was too small to make sense of it, just a blur of something dark sliding over the asphalt. I eased my foot on the gas, picking up speed as my heartbeat punched against my ribs. Every instinct I had screamed not to stop. Whatever I'd seen, I didn't want to meet it face to face. There were 4 more switchbacks before reaching the ridgeline. Each one brought me higher, deeper into the fog. I kept checking the mirrors, telling myself over and over that I wasn't going to look again. But I always did. And each time, I felt like the darkness behind me had thickened, like the mountain night was filling up with something that hadn't been there before. By the 3rd switchback, the fog was so dense I could barely see the lines on the road. I had to roll down the window just to make sure I didn't drift off the edge. Cold air blasted my face, carrying the smell of wet pine and something faintly metallic like old blood. I told myself I was imagining that too. When I glanced into the mirror again, my breath snagged in my throat. Something was walking up the road. I could only see the shape of it, blurred by fog and distance. But it was moving with purpose. No stumbling, no hesitation. Not running. Just walking, steady and slow, like it knew there was no reason to hurry. It was far behind me, But each time I rounded another curve and looked back, it felt closer. "Don't stop," I whispered. "Just don't stop." The fourth switchback was the one I hated most. It had a long straight stretch before the turn, a place where the trees thinned out and the road hung half exposed along the cliff. The fog broke for only a moment, just long enough for my headlights to reach farther than before. And that was when I saw it clearly for the first time. Not through the mirror. Not distorted by fog. Directly ahead, standing at the bend. I slammed the brakes so hard the truck slid sideways on the wet pavement, tires screaming. My shoulder hit the door. The wheel jolted under my hands. The figure didn't move. It stood on the inside of the curve, right at the point where the road began to turn. Tall, impossibly still, facing me. It was like someone had blacked out a person's silhouette with ink. A perfect void in the shape of a man. I couldn't see eyes. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't even see a texture. Just darkness, so thick it felt like it absorbed the light around it. I didn't realize I was whispering until the words left my mouth. "What do you want?" Fog rolled between us like a living thing. The figure didn't respond, didn't shift, didn't breathe. I should have put the truck in reverse or turned around, or done anything but what I actually did. I blinked. Just once. When my eyes opened, the figure was standing closer. Not much. Just a few feet. But enough. I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator, engine roaring as I shot forward. The figure didn't jump out of the way, didn't flinch. My headlights passed straight through it as if it had never been there at all. When I looked in the rearview mirror, nothing was on the road behind me. But the dread didn't lift. It settled deeper, like something had crawled under my skin. The road climbed another mile before cresting the ridge. On the descent toward Porter's Gap, the fog thinned out little by little. My hands were locked around the wheel so tightly they hurt. I kept waiting for the figure to appear again. In the mirror, standing in the middle of the road, or maybe just outside the cone of my headlights. But there was nothing. No shadows where there shouldn't be. No movement behind me. By the time the first lights of Porter's Gap came into view, I'd almost convinced myself it had been the fog playing tricks. Exhaustion. Maybe a trick of headlights on tree trunks. That's what I kept telling myself until I pulled behind the supply store, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The moment my boots hit the ground, I noticed something. On the back bumper of my truck. A smear. Long, dark, and finger-shaped. Like something had dragged its hand across the metal while I was driving. My legs nearly gave out. I backed away from it so fast I slipped on the gravel. I didn't tell anyone. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. Because no matter how real it felt in the moment, saying it out loud makes it sound impossible. Like something no sane person would believe. But here's what I know. I've driven that road my whole life. I know every curve, every shadow. And what I saw wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a trick of fog or headlights. Whatever it was, it followed me. And every now and then, on winter nights when the fog settles low and the mountains go quiet, I still catch myself checking the mirror. Not because I think it's coming back, but because part of me knows it never left. It just learned how to stay out of the light. I crossed that iron bridge hundreds of times growing up, mostly in daylight, sometimes on a bike, once or twice drunk with friends trying to act braver than we felt. It was just part of living in that corner of the mountains. A rusted, sagging structure built sometime before my grandfather was born, stretching across a narrow gorge where the river churned itself into white foam against the rocks. People didn't call it haunted. Not exactly. They just didn't go there after dark. Everyone had an excuse. Too old, too slick, too easy to slip. But the real reason hung unspoken in the air, passed around in quiet porch conversations when the sun went down. Folks said the river carried things that didn't float downstream like they should. Things that didn't belong to the living or the dead. I'd never seen anything myself. Not until that night. It was late October, one of those cold evenings where the air feels thin and sharp, like it's been strained through broken glass. I had stayed longer than I meant to at a friend's place on the far side of the gorge. Their mom offered me a ride home, but I didn't want to wait for the truck to warm up. The bridge was the shorter way, and I'd crossed it before at dusk. I figured the moon was bright enough. I figured wrong. The moment I stepped onto the iron slats, the temperature dropped. Not a breeze, not a gust. Just a steady sinking cold that settled over my shoulders like wet cloth. Mist was rising off the river, thick and slow, sliding between the iron beams like smoke from an extinguished fire. Every footstep clanged hollowly, echoing into the dark beneath me. The sound didn't scatter like it should have. It dropped straight down, swallowed by the gorge. Halfway across, I heard a noise under the bridge. At first it sounded like metal groaning, a deep, grinding strain that sent vibrations through the soles of my boots. I froze, thinking maybe the bridge was shifting under my weight. It did that sometimes. The whole thing would tremble when a truck passed, like it remembered being young and strong and resented what it had become. But the road was empty. Nothing was moving but me. The groan came again, followed by a sound that made my skin tighten all at once. A scream. Not human. Not animal. Something caught between the two, high and sharp, but with a ragged edge that scraped across my nerves like claws. It didn't echo upward from the river. It rose straight from the dark beneath my feet. I told myself to run. I told myself not to look. But curiosity is a dangerous thing on an Appalachian night, especially when you've grown up hearing whispers about things the river keeps. I knelt down slowly, placing my hands on the cold metal grates. The slats were spaced just wide enough to see through if you pressed your face to them. The darkness under the bridge was thick, the kind that felt deep enough to drown in. I held my breath and looked. Something moved. Just a flicker of motion at first, pale against the shadows, disappearing and reappearing as the mist shifted. I leaned closer, squinting between the iron bars. A shape. A shoulder. A sliver of skin. Bare skin. That was when a hand reached up. Thin. Trembling. Fingers long enough that I thought for a second they weren't fingers at all. They curled upward blindly, scraping the underside of the grate. There were no nails, or maybe they had been broken off, but the tips were raw as if they'd been dragging across rock for a long time. I jerked back so fast I slipped, landing hard on the cold metal. The hand convulsed, twisting as though it could sense the warmth of my body through the iron. Another scream tore upward from the darkness, louder this time, closer, vibrating through the bridge. I scrambled backward on all fours, boots clanging against the grates. The hand vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, swallowed by the shadows as though something deeper had pulled it down. I kept retreating until my back hit the railing. I didn't stand. Couldn't. My legs felt locked, like the cold had reached inside me and frozen something essential. I listened. The river churned below, but beneath it, something else moved. Something that wasn't swimming. Something that wasn't drowning. Something that was climbing. The metal groaned again, not from age or wind this time, but weight. It came from the support beam just under where I sat, as though something was gripping it. I felt vibrations travel through the bridge and into my spine. I forced myself up and staggered toward the end of the bridge, slipping more than walking. The mist grew thicker, swallowing the far end until the world shrank to the small patch of iron in front of me. I didn't look down, not again, but I could hear the scraping, slow, deliberate drags against metal that matched my pace like footsteps beneath me. When I reached the last 20 feet, the mist parted enough for me to see the dirt road beyond. That sight alone nearly made me cry. I never realized how comforting a patch of bare earth could look. But the sound didn't stop. The scraping grew faster, like whatever was beneath the bridge realized I was leaving. I broke into a sprint, boots thudding wildly on the grates. 10 feet left. 5. A final scream shot up from the metal beneath me, so loud and furious that it hit my chest like a physical force. I leapt off the bridge without slowing, stumbling onto dirt and falling hard onto my hands and knees. Silence. Not the normal kind. Not the kind where the river keeps babbling and the wind keeps moving. This was total silence. Like the entire gorge had paused just to listen. I twisted around, expecting to see a hand reaching through the slats, or some pale shape crawling up onto the road. But there was nothing. No movement. No pale skin. Just the bridge, old and rusted, stretching quietly across the gorge as if it had never made a sound. I lay there for several minutes, breathing so hard my vision blurred. When I finally managed to stand, my legs were shaking uncontrollably. I backed away from the bridge, step by step, until the mist swallowed it from sight. I took the long road home that night, and every night after that. I tried to tell a few people what I'd seen, but they just nodded in that tired way old mountain folk do, the kind that says they know more than they'll ever say out loud. One man told me he'd heard things under that bridge too, when he was younger. Another said the river sounded wrong in that stretch, like it had voices in it. No one laughed. No one dismissed me. That might have been the worst part, because whatever I heard that night wasn't new. People had been avoiding that bridge for generations. A few weeks later, I passed by during the day and saw something I still can't explain. On one of the iron supports, just above the waterline, were deep scrape marks, long, thin grooves carved into the rust, too far apart to be made by any tool I recognized. They ran vertically, like something had climbed up from the river. Something desperate. Something strong. I left the bridge alone after that. Most folks do. But some nights, when the wind is just right and the river runs low, I swear I can hear those screams in the distance. Not loud. Not close. Just waiting. And every time, I think about that pale hand reaching through the slats, trembling with a need I still don't understand. Sometimes I wonder if it was reaching for help. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd grabbed it. But mostly, I wonder how many hands never come back up. The orchard always felt different in winter. Not dead, exactly, but holding its breath. The apple trees stood like bare bones against the sky, their branches thin and brittle, rattling softly whenever the wind crawled through. My grandparents' house backed right up to the tree lane, and from my bedroom window upstairs I could see the whole stretch of orchard, neat rows turning into crooked shadows at dusk. When I was young, my grandmother used to tell me not to stare too long at the trees after dark. Things move different at night, she'd say, stirring her tea without looking up. I thought she meant deer or stray dogs, or maybe drunk drifters from the highway. I didn't understand the weight in her voice until that winter. It was the third week of January, one of those cold spells where the world goes quiet and the snow packs into a hard crust that crunches under every step. My grandparents had gone to bed early, leaving me downstairs on the couch with a blanket and a dying fire. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remembered was waking to a faint knocking sound. Not loud, not urgent, just steady enough to pull me out of whatever shallow sleep I'd fallen into. At first I thought it was the house settling, old timbers shifting, maybe ice dropping from the eaves. But the sound came again from the back of the house this time. More deliberate, like a knuckle tapping wood. I sat up, listening. The fire had gone completely out. The heater hummed from somewhere deep in the walls, but otherwise the house was still. Too still. The knocking came again. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer by the door and stepped onto the back porch, pulling the old wool coat tighter around my shoulders. The cold hit me so hard it felt like a slap. My breath lifted into the air in thick clouds, drifting toward the orchard. The snow lay perfectly smooth across the ground, fresh, untouched, except for one set of footprints. They started 15 feet from the porch, not leading toward the house, but away from it, as if someone had been standing right beneath the window before I stepped outside. The prints were narrow, almost dainty, but they sank deep into the snow, deeper than any boot should have. No drag marks. No uneven steps. Just a perfect, clean trail heading straight into the orchard. I knew immediately they didn't belong to any of us. My grandfather's steps were wide and heavy. My grandmother barely came outside in winter anymore. And mine, well, mine were right there behind me on the porch. I should have gone back inside. I should have woken my grandparents. I should have locked the door, ignored the knocking, and convinced myself it was nothing. But something in me felt anchored, like the cold had reached into my chest and held me in place. So I followed. The flashlight beam shook as I walked, cutting long shadows across the snow. The orchard felt wrong, the rows too narrow, the air too quiet. Even the wind had died. I moved between the trees slowly, listening for anything. Breathing, footsteps, the creak of branches, but there was nothing except the crunch of my boots. The footprints led deeper, past the newer apple trees, the ones my grandfather planted when I was a kid, past the old fence posts half buried in snow, past the part of the orchard we never used anymore. The footprints didn't wander or hesitate. They moved in a straight, unwavering line toward the far edge, where the oldest tree stood alone. That tree had always bothered me. Its trunk twisted like it had grown while trying to escape something. The bark was dark, almost black in places, and the roots pushed up from the earth like knotted fingers. It hadn't bloomed in years, not since a storm split one of its main branches in two. My grandfather wanted to cut it down, but my grandmother stopped him. Some things should be left where they are, she'd said, and he hadn't argued after that. The footprints circled the tree once. A perfect ring in the snow. Then they stopped at the trunk, like whoever made them had walked right up to the tree and disappeared. No return steps. No disturbed snow. No sign of someone climbing the tree or falling. Just gone. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. The tree looked the same as always. Twisted, old, dead. But the air around it felt strangely thick, as if I'd walked into a pocket of warmth trapped between the branches. My flashlight flickered, just once, like it didn't want to cooperate. I crouched, examining the footprints. The edges were sharp, not softened by wind or melting. They looked fresh, like they'd been made minutes earlier. Whoever made them couldn't have gotten far. But the silence around me felt heavy, watchful. My breath trembled as I reached out and touched the bark. It was warm. Warm like skin left near a fire. Warm like something alive. I jerked my hand back instinctively, stumbling in the snow. My flashlight beam swung wildly across the orchard, catching nothing but the gnarled silhouettes of trees. I turned back to the old apple tree, my heart pounding hard enough to make my ears ring. The warmth wasn't fading. I reached out again, hesitating inches from the bark. A thin line of steam rose where my breath hit the trunk, curling upward like smoke. I pressed my palm flat against the tree. Still warm. Maybe even warmer than before. Something shifted deep within the wood. Not a noise, not a vibration, just a sense of movement. As if something was adjusting itself inside the trunk. As if something had been leaning against the inner surface, listening to my footsteps in the snow. I staggered back again, nearly slipping. My breath came fast and uneven, fogging in front of me. The warmth clung to my palm like a memory. I wanted to run. But part of me felt rooted to the spot, the same way the footprints had drawn me in. I stared at the tree, waiting for something. A sound, a shape, a sign of what had happened to whoever left those footprints. The orchard felt like it was holding its breath again, waiting for me to make the next move. The wind finally returned, carrying a soft rattle of branches that made the entire orchard shiver around me. The warmth on the bark began to fade, pulled away by the cold. The flashlight flickered once more, then steadied. When I reached the house, I shut the door and locked it, my hand shaking too hard to turn the bolt at first. My grandparents never woke. The knocking never returned. But I stood there for a long time, listening for footsteps in the snow. Listening for anything. In the morning, I went out again. I needed to see it in daylight. Needed to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The footprints were gone. Not covered. Not filled in. Just gone as if the snow had never been touched. But the old tree still bothered me. Even from a distance, I could tell something had changed. The bark looked slightly darker, slightly smoother, like the warmth had melted a thin layer of frost. I didn't touch it again. That spring, when the orchard bloomed, every tree burst into white blossoms, except for that one. My grandfather said it was dying. My grandmother said nothing. But sometimes, when I walked past it during the warmer months, I felt a faint warmth radiating from the trunk, even in the heat of summer. Like something inside the wood was still alive. Still waiting. And every winter since, I avoid the orchard when the snow falls. Because deep down, I know the footprints weren't a one-time thing. Whatever walked that path, whatever circled that old tree before vanishing into the bark, it hasn't left. It's just waiting for the snow to return. I still don't know why I stopped that night. I've told myself it was curiosity, or the way the light looked through that cracked church door, or maybe just the quiet stretch of back road playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know it was something else, something that wanted me to walk up that hill, something that had been waiting a long time for someone to come back. The church had always been there, leaning against the Tennessee border like it had grown out of the hillside. Folks said it shut down sometime in the early 80s after attendance dropped to zero. Some talked about arguments between the last pastor and the congregation, others about strange noises heard during night services. But no one ever talked about why it stayed locked up, untouched, almost like people were scared that disturbing it would stir up something better left alone. It was early November, the kind of evening when the cold starts settling into your bones and everything looks like it's been drained of color. I'd worked a longer shift than usual and was driving home on Old Creek Road. The hills were dark silhouettes, the bare trees like tangled fingers reaching up from the earth. When the church came into view, I almost kept going. But then I saw it, a faint glow slipping through the crack in the warped wooden door, flickering like candlelight. At first, I thought I imagined it. The building had been abandoned since before I was born. But the light didn't go away. It pulsed gently, dancing against the frost on the window boards. I slowed down, pulling onto the gravel shoulder. My headlights washed over the slanted white siding, and for a moment, I swear it looked like the building shifted slightly, like the wind had nudged it. But there wasn't any wind. The air was still as held breath. I should have driven home. It's something I've told myself a million times. But instead, I stepped out of the car and started up the hill, my boots crunching the dead grass. The church loomed over me, its crooked steeple pointing at a cloud-heavy sky. I could smell the damp wood, the old rot, the cold stone beneath it all. Halfway up, the light went out. Just gone. Like someone pinched a flame between their fingers. I don't know why, but I kept walking. Maybe it was the sudden darkness that made me want to know what had caused the light in the first place. Maybe it was that strange stillness in the air. Or maybe I'd already gotten too close, and whatever was inside didn't want me leaving. By the time I reached the entrance, my breath was coming out in soft clouds. The door was cracked open about an inch, exactly where the light had shone through. I touched the wood, half expecting it to be warm, but it was freezing. Then, without me pushing it, the door groaned and creaked open wider, slow and steady, like someone on the other side was pulling it. There was no one there. Just darkness. And dust. And a smell like old books and wet earth. I hesitated only a second before stepping inside. I know how stupid that sounds. I know how it must look to anyone hearing this, like I had every chance to walk away. But something about the place held me in a strange kind of silence, like stepping into someone else's memory. The first thing I noticed was how heavy the air felt. Thick, almost wet. My flashlight swept across the room, catching warped pews leaning at odd angles. They were swollen from years of moisture. The floorboards groaned under my weight, sagging as though they remembered too many footsteps. Dust motes drifted in the beam of my light, swirling slowly like something breathing them out. Then I saw it. At the far end of the aisle, near the collapsed altar, someone stood perfectly still. Their back was to me. Tall. Thin. Shoulders slightly hunched, like they'd been standing there for hours. Their head was tilted, just a little to the side. Not in a curious way. More like listening. My throat tightened. The cold ran across my arms so fast I felt my fingers twitch around the flashlight. I opened my mouth, but my voice didn't come out at first. When it finally did, it came out small. Hello. The figure didn't move. Not at first. But their head tilted a little bit farther. Just a slow, deliberate angle. Too far. Like a neck bending in a way it shouldn't. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not from them. The figure at the front of the church didn't make a sound. The breathing came from everywhere else. Soft. Shallow. From corners swallowed in shadows. From behind the pews. From somewhere near the ceiling. It didn't sound mechanical or echoing. It sounded close. Real. Wet. Like a room full of people quietly exhaling all at once. My chest tightened. I wanted to back away, but my legs didn't move. It felt like the air had thickened around me, gripping my ankles. The figure's hand twitched. Not a full movement. Just a little jerk, like a muscle contracting under skin that hadn't been used in a long time. My breathing quickened, and the sound of it felt too loud in the heavy air. I forced myself to take a step backward, my boot tapping the warped floorboard. The breathing in the room stopped all at once. Silence. Total silence. The figure at the front straightened its head slowly, painfully slow, until it was upright. I couldn't see its face. It was still facing away from me, but the shape of it under the dim light made my skin crawl. The head looked wrong. Too long, maybe. Or the shadows were just lying to me. I cleared my throat, fighting the urge to run. I didn't mean to, I started, but the words stuck. I swallowed hard. I thought someone was. The figure lifted its hand slightly, fingers loosening, like it wanted me to stop talking. A board creaked behind me. I froze. The breathing started again, but now it came from behind me too. Closer, faintly damp and deliberate. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the rows of pews. Nothing. Just empty wood and dust and shadows thick enough to swallow the light. I backed up slowly, trying to keep the whole room in view, but the air felt like it was tightening its grip. Every inhale tasted stale, like I was dragging dust into my lungs. When I turned the light back toward the altar, the figure was gone. Just gone. But the breathing hadn't stopped. I felt something shift slightly beside me, like a footfall, barely there. My skin crawled from the inside out. Every instinct in me screamed to get out. Without thinking, I bolted for the door. The floorboards groaned and flexed under my weight, one of them snapping behind me. I didn't dare look back, not with the sound of something moving just out of my peripheral vision, not with that ragged breathing following me out of sync with my own. I reached the open door and hurled myself outside, stumbling onto the cold grass. The night air hit me like a slap. Sharp. Clean. Real. I didn't turn around until I got halfway down the hill. The church door was still open. Light flickered softly inside again. But this time, the glow wasn't warm. It was dim and sickly, like something burning low without oxygen. A shape stood in the doorway, tall, leaning slightly, head tilted just a little too far to one side. I blinked, and the light went out again. Darkness swallowed the doorway. I didn't wait. I sprinted to my car, fumbled the keys, then tore out of there, gravel spitting behind me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. Not even when I thought I heard something dragging across the hillside as I drove off. I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. For a while, I managed to convince myself it was imagination fueled by a long shift and an empty road. But then things started happening around the house. Small things. Footsteps on the porch. A shadow by my driveway. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and swear I heard breathing in the hallway. I tried to pretend none of it mattered, that I'd just scared myself and needed time. But the feeling followed me everywhere. That sense of someone standing just behind me listening. Waiting. Last week, curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I drove past the church again, just to see if the place looked any different. It didn't. Still rotting. Still leaning. Still quiet. But as I passed it, the door creaked open a few inches, slow and smooth. No wind. No animals. No one around. Like it recognized me. Like it was glad I came close again. I don't know what's in that church. I don't know what stood at that altar or who was breathing from the shadows. But ever since that night, I feel like I'm never alone. Like something followed me home. Something that doesn't need footsteps or sound to move around. Something that listens for me in the quiet. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can see the shape of a tall figure standing near the bedroom door, head tilted, waiting for me to speak. I haven't said a word. I'm scared of what will happen if I do. I should have known better than to take an unfamiliar mountain road after dark. Folks who grew up around the Appalachians know the rule by heart. If a road doesn't look like it's meant for you, don't take it. But that night, after a long shift and a GPS signal that kept cutting in and out, I convinced myself that saving 15 minutes was worth trusting a narrow strip of asphalt that didn't even have a center line. It was late summer, that thick humid kind of night where the mountains hold the heat long after the sun goes down. The trees leaned in too close to the road, branches brushing the sides of my car like fingertips. My headlights barely cut through the darkness. Everything felt tighter the farther I went, like the forest was swallowing the road inch by inch. I hadn't seen a house or a turnoff in 15 minutes when I came across an old wooden sign at a fork. The paint was so faded I had to squint to read it, but I made out the name of a town I'd never heard of, something like Brindley or Bryn Hollow. The arrow pointed down the left road. My GPS screen was blank, dead, and my phone didn't have a single bar. I sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick. The night pressed against the windows. Something about that sign felt old in a way the mountains remember. Older than the asphalt beneath my tires. But I was tired, irritated, and stubborn, so I took the turn. The road felt different immediately. Narrower. Rougher. The trees grew thicker, knotted roots jutting close to the edge. I slowed to a crawl. My headlights passed the same shapes again and again. Shriveled underbrush, damp moss, the occasional boulder jutting out like a buried shoulder. Then I saw the fallen log. A big one, split down the middle like lightning had taken it out years ago. I weaved around it, thinking nothing of it. A minute later, I passed a crooked metal mailbox leaning against a post, rust eating through its bottom. 30 seconds after that, I rolled over a patch of asphalt broken into the shape of a half circle, like something heavy had caved it in long ago. Another minute. The fallen log again. Same split. Same angle. Same dark scorch marks on the bark. I actually laughed at first, a short burst of disbelief. Maybe there were two logs that looked similar. The mailbox, too, could have been common around these parts. But when I hit that same broken patch of asphalt again, right down to the jagged little C curve of the damage, the laughter died in my throat. I pulled over. My hands were shaking before I even turned off the engine. The forest hummed with summer insects, but underneath that was something else, something quieter. A kind of thick stillness that made my skin crawl. I got out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and felt the night air settle heavy on me. Just to be sure, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind, I pulled out my pocket knife and walked to the closest tree. It was tall, leaning slightly toward the road. I carved a clean mark into the bark, deep enough that I'd recognize it no matter what. I got back into the car, turned around, drove carefully, watching for anything familiar. When the headlights fell on that same tree, the exact same mark carved fresh into its trunk, my chest tightened so fast I felt lightheaded. I hadn't turned wrong. The road had. It was looping me, holding me. I kept driving anyway because the only thing worse than moving forward on a road like that would be stopping on it. My headlights felt like they were barely keeping the darkness from folding in around me. I watched the tree lean as I drove, half expecting something to step out, half praying nothing would. Another 10 minutes. Another log. Another mailbox. The same broken asphalt. My grip on the wheel went white. When I finally stopped the car again, I left the engine running. The lights cut across the trees in a pale arc. Everything looked too still. Too perfect. Like a scene arranged for me. Then the insects went quiet. All at once. The silence was so sudden and absolute that it didn't feel natural. Like every living thing out there knew something was about to happen and didn't want to draw attention. I sat there breathing shallowly, listening to the hum of the engine fill the emptiness. Then I heard it. From behind the tree lean on the passenger side, deep in the shadows between the trunks, a voice called out, "Help! Hey, please, help me!" My whole body went cold in a way I've never felt before. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded alive. Close. Desperate. Help me, please. I locked the doors without thinking, my fingers fumbling across the panel. Every instinct I had was firing at once, screaming at me not to get out of the car. The voice kept going, but it didn't feel right. The words were right, but the emotion behind them was wrong. Too flat. too spaced out, like something trying to imitate panic without understanding what panic feels like. "Help me. Come here." It was copying the exact way I'd said those same words months earlier when my cousin found me pinned under a collapsed shed roof. Every pause, every breath. Something in the dark remembered my voice. I shifted into reverse, but before I touched the gas, the voice changed pitch. Still mine, but louder now, sharper. "Hey, help me." It came from deeper in the woods. Another version answered from near the broken asphalt on my left. Again my voice, but strained in a way I'd never heard myself sound. "Please, don't leave me." Behind me, near the fallen log, another voice. Raspy, almost whispering like my breath was running out. "Come back." The forest was filled with me. My voice from every direction, echoing through the trees like something had taken it apart and was trying to put it back together wrong. I slammed my foot on the gas, reversing fast enough that the wheels spat gravel. The road seemed narrower than before, the branches reaching lower. I turned the car around so fast I nearly skidded into the ditch. No matter how fast I drove, they stayed close to the tree lane, running parallel to the road. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind. Always just out of sight. One sounded like it was right beside the driver window, whispering hoarsely, "I see you." I didn't look. I just kept my foot down and prayed the road would give up whatever hold it had on me. When I rounded a bend that I didn't recognize, finally something new, I almost cried. A half-mile later, the trees thinned. The air smelled different. Real. Honest. My headlights caught the main highway cutting across the mountains, the clean yellow lines glowing like salvation. The moment my tires hit that asphalt, all the voices stopped. Just gone. I didn't go home. I drove straight to a gas station 30 miles away, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and sat there shaking so hard I couldn't even take my hands off the wheel. I stayed there until dawn, watching every shadow like it might lean closer. I've told this story only twice before tonight. Both times, the person I told tried to come up with rational explanations. Echoes. Animals mimicking sounds. Sleep deprivation. Stress. The brain playing tricks. I would have believed any of that if the voices hadn't followed me all the way to the edge of that road, calling out to me by name in my own voice, from mouths hidden behind trees I couldn't see. I don't drive unfamiliar mountain roads anymore. And sometimes, late at night when things get too quiet, I swear I hear a version of my own voice whispering from somewhere far off. Not calling for help. Calling me back.